reservoir process, okay, and then what happens to the nutrient. So reservoir process release mechanism. So with that we will be covering other elements as well. So it is quite straightforward. So if you understand this, it will be very easy for you to remember and recall whenever you need to do that. So we know that after carbon, the major nutrient that all the organisms require is nitrogen. And even though 78% of air by volume is nitrogen, but this form of nitrogen is not available for us to be used. Okay, so what we have to do, we require some other forms of nitrogen, all the organisms, it's ammonia or nitrate. So it starts with nitrogen fixation. So this is the nitrogen cycles diagram where we have in white reservoir, purple processes, and trophic level in yellow. So what are the reservoir nitrogen that is in the atmosphere? And then these days we also have fertilizers, which we are producing in the industries. So through
Can you show the
industrial
previous slide once again?
yes.
Are you able to see this?
So this is the major source, and then we have this ammonia nitrate, which is there in the soil water, and then it is uptaken by plants. From plants it goes to higher water organism. We know that. The important processes that it can go through, you see that it is there in the producer, nitrogen, it is there in the consumers, it is also there in the detritus food chain. So we have all the different levels or different organisms which are involved. We have nitrogen fixing bacteria. So that's what cycle. So there is some fixation of nitrogen through electrical song. And then we have this root nodule bacteria which are able to fix nitrogen. That means they convert nitrogen to ammonia or nitrate. So all the organisms require these two forms, these two species, ammonia and nitrate, to be used for their life processes. So what is the reservoir? Here we have atmosphere, soil, ammonia, and then nitrogen is more important because amino acids and nucleic acids, they are made up of nitrogen. And then if you look at assimilation, it is nitrogen fixation and nitrification. We'll go to that. What happens here? Plants absorb nitrogen as either ammonia, ammonium ion, or nitrate. So they obtain nitrogen by eating plants and other animals. So the stages in the assimilation of nitrogen, that means the nitrogen that is there in the atmosphere, now how it is going to organism. That is what is the cycling. So nitrogen fixation is the first step where nitrogen is converted to ammonia, and then this nitrogen is taken up by the living organisms. Now once it is there in the living organism, that means it is assimilated. Now it is part of the biomass. Now organic nitrogen breakdown, please pay attention to this. Organic nitrogen breakdown produces ammonia and ammonia. Actually this is ammonia, this is ammonium ion, and the dominance of one over the another will be dependent on pH and temperature. Okay, higher the pH, higher the temperature, ammonia will be dominant form. So, but for now, just understand that organic nitrogen is converted to ammonia and ammonium, and this ammonia is further converted to nitrite and then to nitrate. This process is referred as conversion of ammonia from organic nitrogen is ammonification. Ammonification to nitrate is known as nitrification, and then nitrification produces nitrate. Conversion of nitrate to nitrogen gas and nitrous oxide completes the cycle. So this is known as denitrification. That means we have ammonification, nitrification, and denitrification.
With the help of this,
So this completes the whole cycle. So denitrification Here we have denitrogen bacteria which convert nitrate back to nitrogen and is released back to the atmosphere. We also have detritivorous bacteria which convert organic compound back to ammonia and animals excrete. So this again starts the whole cycle. If you're able to remember these steps, you'll be able to go through the nitrogen cycle easily. So just to rewind, reservoir, we have atmosphere, soil, and then assimilation, we have nitrogen fixation, then ammonification, nitrification, denitrification. That completes the whole cycle. Next we have is this phosphorus cycle. As I told you, this is an example of imperfect cycle because phosphorus does not exist as an atmospheric gas. Please understand that. And remember, there is no known form, gaseous form of phosphorus. And we have these rock phosphates which dissolve in rain as rock weathers, carrying phosphate into streams and soil. So this is the only source of phosphate. Those who are interested, you can find out what is the status of world's phosphate reserve and what are the sources. I'm very sure you will come across some very, very interesting scientific reading. What is the phosphate reserve? What is the source? And how much of it is left? And we have this that can be replenished. Find out. Is it a replenishable stock? Okay. Or something that cannot be. You're interested to know what I'm telling you to read. Okay. So the rocks and minerals which are there, they dissolve the phosphorus, and then the rock particles, coarse material that will settle at the base of the water bodies, and it becomes phosphate-rich rock. And then it slowly releases phosphate into the water body, which allows the algae to grow. Remember, for algal growth, we need carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus, and in some cases, iron and silica. Mainly these are the main nutrients. Carbon is not a problem because it is taken up from the atmosphere and from carbonate and bicarbonate. But these two are critical for life processes, algae growth. Okay. This is an example of phosphorus cycle. So again, what are the reservoir? Phosphate that is there in the rock, phosphate in soil, phosphate in sediment. Now through the sediment, there is this process which is known as geological uplift. That means whatever is at the base, it will slowly rise and then it will release these nutrients. And then once it is there in the water, it is available for organism to take up. Okay. Once phosphate is there, it is available to the organisms. From producers, it goes to consumers, detritus feeders, and then once there is this plant and animal source, they complete their life cycle, they are acted upon by detritus feeders. Remember, what do we know about detritus feeders? They feed on dead organic matter. So they release the phosphate back in soil, from soil during rainfall and runoff. There's, for example, this during rainfall, runoff, the phosphate will be mobilized, and also the fertilizer that we are adding. Again, it will be drained back to the water body. So that's the cycling of phosphorus. Actually, related to nitrogen cycle, I forgot to mention, just try to find out about Gulf of Mexico and the concept of Dead Sea. Go through this. We'll come back to it when we go to module 3. Nitrogen, Gulf of Mexico, and Dead Sea. Okay, it is related to nitrogen. We'll be able to come across some very interesting reading about phosphate and nitrogen. Let me allow some students back in. You are waiting. So what are the reservoir in this case? And phosphate, as we know, they are required for making ATP. ATP, as we know, is adenosine triphosphate, which is very important for cellular metabolism and all the nucleic acids, DNA, RNA. Phosphate is a key element. What is the reservoir in this case? It is the rocks and sediments. Assimilation, plants absorb inorganic phosphate. Now, this is interesting. we're referring to elemental phosphorus. But like in like nitrogen, we require, all the organisms require either ammonia or nitrate. Similarly, phosphate, it is the orthophosphate form which is in the usable form to living organisms. So plants are able to take up inorganic phosphate. Okay, plants absorb inorganic phosphate from soil, and rest of the animals, they obtain phosphorus when they consume plants, and smaller animals are consumed by higher order animals. That's the main process. That's the main assimilation mechanism. And the release, plants and animals release phosphate when they decompose, number one. Number two, their excretory products expelled from the body as waste is also rich in phosphorus. That's how phosphorus is there in the environment, and that's how it gets cycled. So those who are joining late, don't assume that you will get attendance. You get to attend the lecture, but you, if it is one first time, I will allow
Out of them.
Okay, but if you are continuously late for 2-3 classes, or if it is making, you are making this as a habit, then you will not get the attendance. Remember that. Just don't see that if you say present at the end of the lecture, you will be marked present. I will tally that with the sheets that I'm downloading, which MS Teams is recording. Because the time you log in, I can easily see what time who has come. So if someone has joined very late, say, I usually keep the cutoff time as 5 minutes. If you are 5 minutes, even that too in extreme cases. If you want 5 minutes, you will not get attendance. I download the attendance sheet after 5 minutes, okay, and I take that as a cutoff.
I have shared that.
So I'm not, don't be under this impression that by saying present, sir, you will mark present. So after 5 minutes, whoever has come, they will not get attendance. Okay, let's get back to the lecture. Next important element, an interesting one, is sulfur. Okay, sulfur, it is much more interesting and much more sophisticated in terms of cycling. You may have heard that those people who go to clean sewers or sewer networks, they die. And that's one of the reasons is sulfur. You may also have heard about acid mine drainage. Okay, those who are interested, you can note down these terminologies: acid mine drainage, acid, sulfate, soil, okay, sulfide in sewers. So all of this is very important to know because they all are related to sulfur. Even in atmospheric chemistry, it is the SO2, sulfur and SO2, which are the major causes of acid rain. So cycling of sulfur is very important, and it has both found in minerals, that means in mineral rocks, and there are also gaseous phases. Okay? Now, let us start with this elemental sulfur. Suppose there is elemental sulfur in the soil. Now, it is mostly present in the anaerobic condition, and then purple and green phototrophic bacteria, they are able to oxidize this sulfur to sulfate, okay, in anaerobic conditions. And then we have this sulfate reducing bacteria, which again converts the sulfate back to sulfur and hydrogen sulfide. This also happens in anaerobic conditions. Anaerobic means when there is no presence of oxygen, strict absence of oxygen. Even slight presence of oxygen will kill these bacteria. So these anaerobic bacteria, they will not be able to survive. So this sulfate is taken up by plants and bacteria, and then it becomes part of the sulfidyl group that is there in the proteins. So like what we have seen in terms of phosphate, nitrogen, sulfur is also a very key element in organisms' cellular metabolism. Other than that, we have this release of sulfur dioxide from burning of fossil fuels, which we know leads to generation of sulfuric acid. Now again, there is this elemental sulfur which can be oxidized by these bacteria such as Bagote and Thiobacillus. That means the cycle of sulfur is active in aerobic condition and also under anaerobic conditions. There are aerobic bacteria which are able to oxidize sulfur. There are anaerobic bacteria which are able to oxidize sulfur as well. So then once we have this sulfur and sulfate and hydrogen sulfide, it changes its forms, and that is dependent on the oxic and anoxic and anaerobic. We'll understand about these terms more, but for now understand this. Oxic means when we have oxygen-rich condition, anoxic means oxygen devoid conditions, when oxygen concentration is very low or absent. Anaerobic means strict absence of oxygen. So those people, those you hear that those who want to clean sewers, they die because of sulfide. Sulfide is a toxic and corrosive gas. You may have also heard about concrete corrosion. Okay, concrete corrosion. Even concrete corrosion is carried out by the sulfur oxidizing bacteria. Okay, and sulfur reducing bacteria. So all these bacterial processes are responsible for corrosion. What are the reservoir species? As I told, sulfur is required for protein synthesis. Reservoir, water and soil through rocks and minerals. In sediments, it accumulates on ocean floors and return to the surface because of uplifting by geological processes. Assimilation, plants take up the sulfate from soil and water, and animals obtain from these organisms. And release mechanism, there is this excretory products and decomposition products. So next cycle that we'll be seeing is water cycle, which basically covers both hydrogen and oxygen. So here we have the water cycle, which is basically weather patterns that form part of the water cycle. That means water remains chemically unchanged during the whole water cycle. It is evaporated as vapor, condensed into rain clouds, and finally falls as precipitation. And this water gets collected in porous rocks in aquifers, which is known as groundwater, much purer form of water. So this hydrological cycle diagram is much more simple than what we have seen in terms of other nutrients and elements. Here we have reservoir and processes. What are the reservoir? Water vapor in the atmosphere, water that is there in the lakes, water that is there in the groundwater, water in the ocean. So these are the reservoirs. What are the processes? Precipitation is one process. Precipitation is one. Evaporation and transpiration is another. Evaporation from ocean, precipitation over ocean, then runoff from the surface. All these are the processes which allows the cycling of water.
So that's it.
If you look at the reservoir, we have these oceans,
Yes, of course.
air, groundwater, lakes. So these are the sources. Assimilation, plants and animals, they take up water, and then releases, plants transpire, animals breathe and expel liquid waste. So that concludes the biogeochemical cycle part of this module, and we'll be going to the last part of this module 1, which is related to environmental pollution and ecosystem management.
Then you will really so I will just and further do same right?
So when we say environmental pollutants, what are they?
My internet broke off. I mean, what did you teach after water cycle? Was that
That's the last part. Water cycle was the last one. Now we're moving to the next topic. Environmental pollutants. Basically, we are going to briefly touch, and then we'll be covering these pollution aspect in module 2, 3, 4, and 5. We are going to understand environmental pollution and ecosystem management. These are the new topics that we are going to cover. So what do we mean by this pollutants? As
so
the
can
name
you do
suggests.
that hydrological cycle thing again?
Yes, basically in hydrological cycle, what we have the water vapor, that's one of the reservoir. then water in the lakes and stream, in groundwater, and water in the ocean. So this is what is getting cycled. These are the reservoirs. Okay, I've not included glaciers here, but you can include that one as well. And then what happens to this water that is there in this reservoir? Precipitation over land, precipitation over ocean. So that adds water back to the land and water body. And then evaporation, from ocean and evaporation from land and transpiration from plants gets this water back to the atmosphere. And then there is the cycle of condensation and evaporation and precipitation. So in terms of sources or reservoir, we know what are the sources. Assimilation, almost all the plants and animals, they require water. And then the release mechanism is plants transpire, animals breathe and expel liquid waste. That's how water is cycled.
Thank you, sir.
So next is environmental pollutants. So we have different types of pollutants that are there in the environment. Now, if you want to classify pollutants, you can do that in terms of based on the state of matter, whether it is solid, liquid, or gas. Either you can categorize them in terms of their chemistry, for example, or whether they're organic or inorganic. If it is organic, we have pesticide, herbicide, petroleum compound, food waste, agricultural waste, etc. Inorganic, we have metals and metal compounds, for example. And then we also need to understand what is the fate. Fate means what will be the ultimate form in which the pollutants will remain in the environment. If it is organic, they can be completely mineralized. Complete mineralization means they can be broken down to CO2 and H2O. That's the basic elemental form. That's the place where we are able to see starting point of photosynthesis. Whereas if we see the fate of inorganic pollutants. Now remember, whenever we are referring about inorganic pollutants, say for example metals and metallic compounds, they cannot be degraded, they cannot be destroyed, they will remain in the environment. But what we can do, we can transform them in terms of their phase. Phase transformation is possible. Their speciations can be altered, but they will remain. For example, something which is soluble, it can be made insoluble. Okay, but that element will remain. Say for example, copper. I can have either copper in the water as soluble form, or I can add some sulfide salt. That sulfide will go and react with copper to form copper sulfide, whose solubility product is very low, so that will settle out as copper sulfide. I'm giving you this example. So what is this example? Here we are referring to changes in the speciation, changes in its oxidation state. So that is the important concept related to environmental pollutants. We have organic and inorganic, we have solid pollutants, we have liquid pollutants, we have gaseous pollutants, and examples are given there. So next important part is to understand these terminologies. Degradation, biodegradation, what does that mean? So for example, I'm adding glucose in a water body. Now this is sugar, simple sugar. It will be completely broken down to CO2 plus H2O. This is breakdown. Now on the other hand, I have a benzene ring structured compound. It is very slow to degrade. Okay, degradation means conversion of complex substrate to simple ones. When we have organisms, plants involved in this process, for example, bacteria or fungi breaking down this benzene ring structure, we call it biodegradation. Remediation means treatment. Whenever we have anything which is contaminated, we call the process of cleaning up as remediation. When we use live processes, say plants or bacteria, we call it bioremediation. And then the other important point is transformation, physical, chemical, and biological transformation. For example, whenever we are, say, sunlight breaking down any compound which is there in the atmosphere or in the environment, this is an example of physical cleaning. Chemical, whenever there are chemical reactions involved. Biological, whenever, as I told you, either bacteria or animals that are involved in transforming the compounds. Rehabilitation is the process of recovering an impaired environmental system. Suppose a pond which is contaminated, if someone is cleaning up that pond by removing the vegetation around, that would be considered as a rehab job. Whereas restoration means putting it back to what it was. Suppose I have taken a land, I have cleaned the vegetation, and I have mined. Now, this place was a forest area. That means after I have done the mining, I should be able to convert this mined area back to forest. Okay, that is restoration. There is this difference between rehabilitation and restoration. Restoration means putting the environment back to what it was before we started off any activity. So whenever we are
Can
referring,
you explain?
say for example, I have taken a forest land or an agriculture land. I am finding that there are copper deposits. Now during mining, what I do, I'm cleaning the vegetation or cleaning the any standing vegetation, and then I do the mining. So what I have done, I have disturbed the whole soil and disturbed the whole vegetation. Now, if instead of this, if I convert the mine, once the resources are gone, once I have extracted all the minerals, now suppose I am saying that I'm converting it to an industrial area, that would be considered as rehabilitation. Whereas if I am giving that land back as a forest area, that means after mining, I'm creating the forest back or I'm revegetating, that would be considered as a restoration. Putting it back to what it was. Any degraded system, okay, whether it is water or land, if we are putting it back to what it was, that's a restoration. Now in environment, whenever we have any compound that is released, it will be acted upon by two processes. One is known as abiotic and another one is abiotic. And the best example that I can give you is, say, we have a dye, say textile dye. Textile dye. Now, if I'm exposing this dye to the atmosphere, it would fade. This fading means it is chemically and physically interacting with the environment, and this fading is occurring because there is some change. Sorry, the changes which is happening to its chemical properties. That's an example of a abiotic process. Now, I'm taking this dye and I'm mixing it with some bacteria. Now, if this bacteria is acting and degrading this dye, that's an example of biotic process, biodegradation, biotransformation. So first let us understand what is the fate of pollutants in atmosphere or in environment. In general, let us focus on environment. Atmosphere, air, water, soil will go as we move further in this semester. Fate of pollutants, that means they can be either exposed to abiotic processes or biotic. One of the dominant abiotic processes is oxidation. The best example that I can give is combustion. Say whenever we burn methane, it is going to release, say it's minus sign because it is an exothermic reaction and its heat of combustion is 50.6 kilojoule per gram. That means if I burn 1 gram of methane, I'll be able to get this much of energy. Okay. So oxidation is going to give some energy. Now, how is this important for us? In environment, as I told you, suppose there is some accidental spill of petroleum compound. Okay, assume two scenarios. One, it is spilled on a land which is, say, rich in vegetation. Okay, and another one, say, desert soil, okay, desert area. And another one, say, it is spilled in a water body. Now, what will happen? The petroleum compound, same compound, say, if it is spilled in land which is rich in vegetation, say for example garden soil, the petroleum compound will be degraded fast because of microbial activity. That's an example of oxidation mediated by microbes. If it is in the desert soil, the rate of degradation will be very slow because of very low microbial activity, very low chemical reaction, very low rate of chemical reaction. And then if it is in water body, because it is not miscible, it will again be very slow to be degraded. Now keep this as a background, as an example, and see. So these food petroleum compound or any compound which is there in a solution, they can undergo phototransformation, and this phototransformation will be dependent on the energy of the incident light, which can be found out using this equation. We know that. So phototransformation, that means interaction of light with the matter, can lead to fragmentation of organic compound. And I say assume multi-ring benzene structure. That is what is there in these petroleum compounds. They can undergo oxidation, and these fragmented products can polymerize. So these are some of the reactions which can happen. Photoreaction can be divided into three stages. We have absorption, that means absorption of light. Not all the all the functional groups can interact with light. So those functional groups which are strong in absorbing light, they would absorb and undergo primary photochemical reaction and secondary photochemical reactions. For example, absorption of radiation. Now, alcohol, ether, amine, they are poor in light absorption. That means our clothes, they contain amine as major component in dyes. That is the reason that whatever clothes we are wearing, they don't fade easily. Because what if I'm using a dye which is going to fade very easily after one wash, or if I go outside in the sun? That's not desirable. So we are using that also. So, but that's one aspect. But then remember, if something is very tough to be deleted, then treating that wastewater will also be a big challenge. We'll come to it when we go to module 3. Another important abiotic process is hydrolysis. What did I tell? That if petroleum compound is spilled in a water body, it will remain there, it will float because it is not getting mixed. Why it is not getting mixed? Because it is hydrophobic, it is able to repel water. Now, take this example. I'm taking this compound, organic compound. Suppose I'm making it react with water. Even though it will not react very easily, but once this hydroxide group is inserted into this compound, its water solubility increases. So what hydrolysis does? Hydrolysis increases water solubility. And in turn, that allows the compound to be transformed and degraded easily. Under biotic processes, we have biotransformation and biodegradation. So here we have microbial transformation, which is carried out by bacteria, fungi, algae. These are the organisms which are used in treating water, air, soil, wastewater. And within microbes, we have autotrophs and heterotrophs, which I have told you already. So you know this. And then I've also given you this example of aerobic, anoxic, and anaerobic metabolism in sulfur cycle. So oxidation of organic matter is carried out by bacteria through aerobic, anoxic, and anaerobic metabolism. We'll come to these in detail as we go. For now, just remember these are the life processes which allow decomposition of organic matter. Next, we have to understand this breakdown of pollutants. The biological breakdown of chemicals is called metabolism. Suppose
Sir, you are not
Sir,
clear.
your screen is not visible.
okay, I'll reshare it.
Yes, sir.
Now, what do we mean metabolism? Say, for example, the food you consume, you digest it, and then part of it goes to maintain the cellular activities and give you some energy. That's metabolism. Similarly, bacteria, fungi, algae, plants, animals, they all do this. So whenever there is breakdown of chemicals by organisms, we call it metabolism. That means हम लोग बहुत हमेशा use करते हैं ना, they are not able to metabolize. Metabolize means we are not able to degrade, we are not able to break down that compound. And this ability to metabolize varies among individuals and species. For example, there are some chemicals which are highly soluble in fat but are easily metabolized. So these chemicals do not accumulate. Now, what I'm coming to, I'm asking you to refer, suppose we are consuming a lot of carbohydrates and we're taking a lot of carbs. Now, what if our body is not able to digest it? What will happen to it? If it is not digested, that means it will not be expelled from the body. So that means it will get accumulated. Generally, this is not the case with good things with carbohydrate, fats, protein, lipid. Doesn't get accumulated. But then there are chemicals, there are compounds which will not be metabolized by the body, by the organisms, either by human beings, animals, or any organism. So what they do, they would accumulate. So those which are metabolized, they will not be accumulated. Remember this. Those compounds which we are able to metabolize, they will not be accumulated in these cells. Thus, biological breakdown is one of the factors leading to one of two specific consequences of chemical bioaccumulation. That is bioconcentration or biomagnification. Let us understand what they are. So we have these three factors: bioaccumulation factor, biomagnification factor. So bioaccumulation factor, basically it is the ratio of a test chemicals concentration and test organism tissues to that in the surrounding medium, when all potential uptake mechanism are included. So something is there in the soil. Okay, I'm saying that something is there in the soil, and there is this plant or tree that is growing. Now, if the soil is contaminated with, say, pesticide, what will happen? This plant through roots will be able to uptake. Now, if this pesticide is not metabolized by this plant or tree, it will bioaccumulate. Now, here, what we are saying, when we are taking into factor all the factors, this is one mechanism. Atmospheric exchange is another mechanism. So there is a specific term which we use, bioconcentration. Now, this bioconcentration factor, it is a specific case of bioaccumulation, where the uptake is only from the surrounding medium. So all the potential uptake mechanism are not involved. When it is taken up from the surrounding medium, this is a specific case related to water. For example, fishes and organisms, phytoplankton, zooplankton, if they are able to accumulate some toxic products that is present in the water, that would be considered as a case of bioconcentration because it is taken from the surrounding medium. Biomagnification factor means ratio of tests chemical concentration in the tissues of an organism to that in the organism's prey. Now, biomagnification means movement of that pollutant from one trophic level to another trophic level. This will help you to understand what we are referring to. Biomagnification is a process by which, yes.
So in the previous slide, can you explain that all the uptake mechanisms are included in the first point? Can you explain that?
Uptake. One is direct uptake, and then other one is, say, for example, atmospheric exchange. Those are the major routes of entry. Okay, whereas when it is just taken up from the medium in this case could be soil or water. Okay, so we are not excluding that. Say, for example, even if we are considering human beings, what are the routes of entry of any pollutant? We have dermal contact, inhalation,
yes, sir.
Ingestion. These are the routes of entry. Dermal, contact to skin, inhalation, when we are inhaling something which is vapor or which is in particle form, which we are able to take up through the nostrils or through mouth. Ingestion means when we are consuming something. Okay, so that's the route of entry. So this is specific to animals and humans. Whereas when we are referring to plants and organisms, we have this bioaccumulation, bioconcentration, and biomagnification.
Okay.
Okay, this is an example of biomagnification. Assume this is the pollutant. Okay, this is the pollutant. This could be anything, metals, radioactive compound, anything you are just able to think. From there it goes to algae. From algae it goes to, say, zooplankton. From zooplankton it goes to small fish. from small fish to large fish and then to the topmost predator. That means it is a process by which toxic chemicals build up within the predators. This is biomagnification. That means something that was there in the environment, it has moved up the trophic level. Okay, it has moved up the trophic level. So this movement of pollutants from one trophic to another trophic is known as biomagnification. And in the process, you see that the topmost organism which is there in the trophic level will have the highest level of pollutants present in their biomass. This typically occurs because across an entire food chain and affects all of the organism. But animals that are there at the higher order are most affected. Because, as I told you, to sustain this one eagle, go back to that concept of food chain and food web. To sustain this one eagle, we require a very high amount of energy at the base. So what happens as these toxic chemicals they move up, they are not metabolized and are easily excreted. That's the reason they build up in the system. So bioaccumulation is the process of building up. Biomagnification is once the pollutant moves from one trophic level to another trophic level. That means biomagnification occurs due to bioaccumulation. This is another example. Whether we call it bioamplification or biomagnification, they all mean the same. This is movement of pollutant from an aquatic system to polar bear. This blue color is an example of contaminant. This topic we'll cover in tomorrow's lecture. I hope it was interesting and you will do some further reading related to these, and slides are already uploaded. You can refer that. Okay. Okay, first I'm going to call electronics. Okay, triple E. Mohammed,
Yes, sir.
Dash Abro,
Present, sir.
Rushil Gupta,
Present, sir.
Priyanshu,
Present, sir.
Surma,
Yes, sir.
okay, Sapanya,
Yes, sir.
Rahul,
Yes, sir.
Yash Kumar. How do you call?
Present.
Kumar, Yash, or
Present.
Yash Kumar.
Present,
Kaise-
sir.
Yeah, that's okay. How do you
Present,
prefer to be called? How do you prefer
Sir,
to be
Kumar.
called?
Sir, Kumar Yash Ojha.
Okay, Kumar Yash. Vishal Kumar, Aditya Kumar,
Yes, sir.
Boom Dandan, Boom, Adil Rashid,
Yes, sir.
Saurabh Kumar,
Present, sir.
Amiya Jha,
Present, sir.
Shivam Kumar,
Present, sir.
Aryan Sinha,
Present, sir.
Ankit Raj. Ankit Raj absent. Avinash Kumar,
Yes, sir.
Nisha Rani,
Present, sir.
Kumar Saurabh,
Present, sir.
Shaurya Singh, Shaurya Singh. Okay, Ishan Prabhat,
Yes, sir.
Mohammad Jamshed,
Present, sir.
Aniket Kumar,
Present, sir.
Pulkit,
Present, sir.
Aditya Kumar,
Present. Kumar Misra, sir.
Yes, Pulkit Kumar Mishra. No, Pulkit Revri, sorry.
Present,
So
sir.
you come after Aniket. Pulkit Revri come after Aniket Kumar. Okay. Aditya Kumar Mishra.
Present, sir.
Aditya Kumar. Arghya Mahanti. Ashish Bharadwaj.
Present. Argya present.
Shivang.
So Shivang Aaron present.
Okay. Shruti Shikha.
Present, sir.
Ankita Ayushi.
Present, sir.
Vedant Gupta.
Present, sir.
Kushi Kumari.
Present, sir.
Anushka Singh.
Present, sir.
Sujit Kumar. Pratik Ghosh.
Present, sir.
Anish Mishra. Rishabh Sarkar.
Present, sir.
Saurabh Meena.
Present, sir.
Shobhashri Saha.
Present, sir.
Tanmay Raj.
Present, sir. Shubhashi Shah, sir.
Okay, Tanmay Raj.
Present, sir.
What's your roll number, Tanmay?
The BTech 1041021.
Okay, Mayuk Bandyopadhyay.
Present, sir.
Mayank.
Present, sir.
Chaitanya Khare.
Present, sir.
Akshay Pandey.
Present, sir.
Aditi Somin.
Present, sir.
Aniket Saurabh.
Present, sir.
Ankit Kumar Gupta. Okay, Chetna Motila. Chetna.
Present, sir.
Abhishek.
Present, sir.
Abhishek Pathak. Shashank
Present,
Shekhar.
sir.
Alokik Prakash. Alokik Prakash.
Present, sir.
What were you doing? Why you are not answering?
Present, sir.
Who is that?
Okay, class.
Okay. What's your roll number, Alokik?
So BT 1058921.
Divyan Singh.
Present, sir.
Sanskar Das. Praveen Rawat. Anish Kumar Barnwal.
Present, sir.
Akshay Tripathi.
Present, sir.
Rahul.
Present, sir. Present, sir.
Vijul.
Present, sir. Present, sir.
Yashraj. Yashraj.
Present, sir.
Okay. Hitesh.
Present, sir.
Harshit. Okay. Beena Sunila. Abhiraj Kumar.
Present, sir.
Absent. Okay. Abhiraj present.
sir. Yes,
Okay. Beena Sunila.
Present, sir.
Why you are so late? So next time if you are respond late, you will not be marked present. Okay. Section F can leave.
Sir, you have not called my name.
It is not there. I think it is not updated in the ERP. जिसका भी नहीं है मुझे नाम बता दें, मैं नोट करके रखूंगा. I will see that it is incorporated.
Sir, Ankush Raj.
Ankush Raj.
Sir, Komal Kumari.
एक मिनट, one by one. अंकुश राज रोल नंबर बताएं आप.
BTech 10208.
0208. कोमल कुमारी. Yes.
Sir, 107.
ये मैंने IT का नहीं लिया है.
745.
कोमल कुमारी, you are from Tripoli?
Yes, sir.
Okay. तो ट्रिपल ई कैन लीव, उनका हो गया अटेंडेंस। वेद प्रकाश
667.
ओके 10667 ओके। और कौन है?
सर साहिल कुमार. रोनित कुमार.
वन बाय वन प्लीज। स्पेलिंग बताओ साहिल। रोनित RONIT
SAHIL.
नहीं, रोनित कुमार बोलो। रोनित कुमार क्या है रोल नंबर?
RONIT.
ठीक है, रोल नंबर
10190.
ट्रिपल ई के हो ना?
नहीं सर, IT.
मैंने IT नाम ही नहीं लिया, अभी बता रहा हूं मैं। IT के अटेंडेंस होने के बाद बताइएगा। सुनते नहीं हो आप लोग बस, हैं? ये कौन था? साहिल?
सर साहिल कुमार.
ट्रिपल ई से हो?
यस सर.
रोल नंबर?
सर 10352.
Okay, so I'm moving to IT for attendance. Please pay attention. Triple E, you can leave.
Thank you sir.
Yes, Jen. Yes, Jen. Yes, Jen. Yes, IT, please respond to your answer, roll call. Yes, Jen. Absent. Anurag Gupta. जिनका attendance होता है, they can leave.
Yes, sir, I am present.
Who is this?
Anurag Gupta.
Anurag Gupta present. एक मिनट. Yes, Jen के बाद अरूबा है. अरूबा?
Yes, sir.
Okay. ईशान गुप्ता. Anurag Gupta is present. Ayush Raj.
Present sir.
Kumar Sanyam.
Yes sir.
Shiv Shankar Prajapati.
Present sir.
Mohammad Faizan.
Yes sir.
Mandadi Vishwak.
Present.
How do you want to be called? You have two names. Na? First, Vishwak. Okay, Vishwak is present. Rajkumar. Rajkumar Kumbhaj. Abhay Kumar Sharma.
Present sir.
Parijit Milind.
Present, sir.
Rajkumar Ravi.
Present sir.
Roshan Kumar.
Present sir.
Ronit Kumar. Ronit Kumar ने तो नाम लिखवाया था.
Present sir.
You are present.
Present,
Yes.
sir.
Piyush Kumar.
Present sir.
Siddharth Kumar.
Present sir.
Praveen Kumar.
Present sir.
Kashif Mozum.
Present sir.
Harsh Narayan. Yash Padia.
Yes, sir.
Pranshu Shekhar Singh.
Present sir.
Anshul.
Present sir.
Anshul Benhar.
Present
Please
sir.
pay attention. Vikas. Vikas. Gyan Ranjan.
Present sir.
Kumar Harshvardhan.
Yes sir.
Manas Mishra.
Present sir.
Prince Aryan. Anubhav Thakur. Himanshu Raj.
Present sir.
Yes, sir.
Anubhav Thakur present.
Who's this?
Anubhav
सो रहे
Thakur.
थे क्या अनुभव?
Himanshu Raj.
सो रहे थे क्या?
माइक चालू नहीं हो रहा था सर एकदम.
हाँ, तो थोड़ा चालू रखोगे, अपने आप को भी चालू रखो, सोना नहीं है. आज प्रेजेंट लगा रहे हैं, कल से करोगे तो एब्सेंट रहोगे.
Sir, Himanshu Raj present.
Okay, Aditya Dev,
Present, sir.
Adarsh Ranjan,
Present, sir.
Tarun Agarwal,
Present, sir.
Akhil Sai,
Present, sir.
Siddharth Saraf,
Present, sir.
Harshit Prandial,
Present, sir.
Amog Mudhudar,
Present, sir.
Gaurang Dikshit,
Present, sir.
Praveen Dikshit,
Present, sir.
Sudarshan Bhagat,
Present, sir.
Harsh Azad, Aditya Singh, Aditya Sunil.
Present, sir.
Which one you want to be called? Aditya Singh या Sunil?
Sir, Aditya Singh.
ठीक है. समर्थ प्रताप,
Present, sir.
आकर्ष श्रेष्ठ,
Present, sir.
निखिल वर्मा,
Present, sir.
नवीन राज, प्रकाश माझी,
Present, sir.
रेशमा कुमारी,
Present, sir.
सांढिल अग्रवाल,
Present, sir.
आदित्य दुबे,
Yes, sir.
अभिजैन प्रेजेंट सर, गौरव आनंद,
Present, sir.
मुदित राय,
Present, sir.
आयुष्मान तवेर, संयम जैन,
Present, sir.
प्रभात कुमार, ऋतुजा राठौड़,
Yes, sir.
स्वर्ण शेखर, बंसल मन्नन, आयुष सिंह,
Present, sir.
अस्मित कुमार सिंह, सौम्यदीप,
Present, sir.
मोहित कुमार,
Yes, sir.
शैलेश,